Hello. Okay. Ani changma letter selection is tambo material.
So first, I'd like to welcome everyone to the teaching.
Ani changma kusu devo yinsha res ani rewa yus.
So I hope that all of you are doing well.
Dine kazang di chodun chik ani che song ngarang check up ki che de dogo to sons gonda shugi.
Kumta younger song
Kazang ki chodun yorala. Ani di chungma song kari resena ken di ngarang ani mengang la droba yins takchi chiga.
So I'd like to apologize that we were unable to meet last week. Kampola had some prior arrangements to go receive instructions.
Okay, I'm not Kimbo, okay. Kimbo de mason.
Oh. Yeah, sorry about that.
If material say Kimbo, then nowadays very sensitive. This title has to be careful. Even I don't know myself is Tulku or not, but title is there. Still have to investigate. Therefore, it's very sensitive of these title things. Then जैसे लागले जैसे मुझे थोमी किसी भी जैसे लागले दी रेस चुदी.
So now we're studying Gyaltsek Ngutritome Sangpo's 37 practices of the Bodhisattva, as we know.
Then the chudi mashu kungla then chungna da ngarang so jase langle shu bi kapsure da chu shu bi kapsu lama inare shaking gi lama inare nyinging gi loma inare chungna da chu jase langle khurang di ngone china jase langle di laglen se do shung chikbu ma imba di chunju gi shung di changma chu duni teni su nyamlen che gi chiga chöjik tab devo gi ngani dende ji indu ngone china chö nyembe nyene teni chuzi chik srena kama khashi ji chungna ta cholo ka ni nare chigi nare kare nyemba de nyamlen chito na yaboy res.
So before we begin teaching, before we begin listening to the Dharma, we need to consider that this text is the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas. Emphasis on this word practice. This isn't intended to be something that we just listen to once, because Gyaltsek Togme Sangpo has condensed the entire meaning of Shantideva's way of the Bodhisattva into these verses, which are very concise and very convenient and easy to practice. So however much time we spend listening to the Dharma here, whether we cover 2 verses or even just a single verse, it's something that we should put into practice.
Jidan jase ngoju thongme khongre na teni khongre di jase lale sungbe kapsu digi chok saja je rala kona shuksagi saja chok dewala teni jase ngoju thongme khona keta chembore janju ge sem gi nyamlen chigi pa res ne pe keta chembore
Kapar Kertak Temple Song.
khongre shuksa je ra phela teni khongra shuksa gi lungba dila khongre 지 시에 개발해서 시에다 야슬랑 디 전주나 비자 망보여 슝 이나양 콩게다 첨부데 가르쳐서는 비값수 권한 냠렌친 korang one laklen tar ni lungba di nang la kong kera chumbo res tingka zinga dum she ba kong dum kongra kuma jakba lepsona ya kong laklen tar ni mi den zola yakbo sa gyuk sen de den laklen tar ge gangsa ji indu kong kera chumbo chak son ba res shung kheba chikbu gi cheni ke kong kera chumbo chak ba mares.
So Gyaltse Tokmai Songpo, the author of our text, became widely renowned in Tibet where he taught, not only because he was skilled at teaching texts like the way of the Bodhisattva, but because he became renowned as a practitioner of the Bodhisattva path. For example, if thieves or robbers came and stole from him, he would just gladly let them walk away with his belongings. And so in his day and age, the author was widely renowned as someone who practiced what he preached.
De indo de ngarang zo ina ya tanda chik ni ta de nang lo la mangbo ji sung yo da den zo amjo da ko ba dang kin namba nying gi ro sen du de ni dos dos nyamne la jarni ngarang zo ge ta chowa tanda debe kapsure drobe kapsure legong re khawa drona nang la de na ya dos dos ji injikela ma son reflect au chini kyas la len di shuni and deto by na ngone pingires.
So if after hearing these teachings, we're able to reflect on even just a couple of words from these precious teachings while we're staying at home or going to the office, whether we're sitting down or lying down or walking about, if we're able to bring to mind and reflect on the verses of these teachings after we listen to them, then they'll truly become beneficial for us.
Ene ta dering kaps baba deni di shubi kapsu ta kulong la ya gechembo res ke number shubi kapsu deni kulong de pe gechembo indu shudu ta jidang kulong da kunjö se ni sungo re ta kulong de gechembo re kulong de deni 지가 단다 kapsu baba chö di yang tekpa chenpo chö indu teni gansa yang tekpa chenpo yingore ta gansa sidu zani ngarang zo sim di kulong la gansa sani kebar sha gore kulong di kebar ta rimba namba sum ni tanda kapsu baba tekpa chenpo ki kulong di yingore rang chikbu ma yinba teni simje thamji sanji ji gobang tobi chedu teni chö nyen sam gom dede chigi yin samni dene tekpa chenpo ki gansa ji shisha ne chönyen gores sing gores.
So even before we receive the teachings on the Dharma, the most important thing is to reflect on our motivation and correct our motivation. And since we're listening to teachings about the Mahayana, the great vehicle, then we should also develop the motivation that pertains to the great vehicle. There's motivation and then our conduct. And as Mahayana practitioners, when we study, reflect, or meditate on the Dharma, any of these three activities, then we shouldn't just be doing it for ourselves, but we should form the motivation and the resolve that we're doing it so that all sentient beings, without exception, can attain this state of perfect awakening. And if we're able to develop this kind of heartfelt motivation, then this is the correct kind of motivation for Mahayana practitioners.
Tugla chani tekpa chenpo shisha chini tugla kulong tekpa chenpo shisha chini deni chö senro chi se deni sembar jawi ki chö de deni jase ngoju thongmi ki zebi ki jase lale sodi mati res.
So please take this quintessential teaching of the great vehicle to heart, and upon this basis, listen to the teachings. The teachings we're concerned with here today are the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva.
Teni tila shung tila thomar gewa gewas ne pardu gewa shungi de thomar gewa legi de pardu gewa shungi de thamar gewa jugi de sene de sumdus de sumgi na ne thomar gewa de sonsa ware teni pardu gewa shungi de dila teni ngondro gi chola juksu da ngoshi kebusum gi lamla juksu ni che Nigi nani ngondro de la dani chue dundus chue dunde song chabares and tanda kapsu baba ngushigi kibusum ki lam tensu de nane dani kibu chungu kibu ding kibu chembu tanda ki kapsu baba kibu chembu ki lam de res.
So this text can be subdivided under the headings that pertain to the goodness in the middle, the meaning of application, the goodness at the beginning, the goodness in the middle, which is the primary meaning, and the goodness at the end, which is the concluding meaning. As for the goodness at the beginning, the meaning of the application, we've already covered that, and we have moved on to the goodness in the middle, which is further subdivided into the preliminary practices, which have 7 points that we've already covered, and then the main practice, which is further subdivided into 3 headings, which are the paths of lesser, middling, and greater beings. And of those 3, we've arrived at the path of greater beings in the main part of practice.
Ni kibu chungu se de kazingem la ngale shu sa ba in zo de ta kibu chungi lam se de ngendo dunga li jingni tikba pongwa. Di kibu chungu re. Teni kibu ding se de siba dewala machakbar. Ten tarba denden yeba siba sena towa rigduk ra sada mita denzo la ani machakba chini teni tarba ge denden yerba chi kibu ding re. Danda kapsa baba kibu chimbo re kibu chimbo ge dila teni samba jangju chok do sem ge wada jorwa jangju chu sem sen ni dus tadi khazing mixi shu go sa mare kibu chimbo lam se de kibu chimbo lam de toni ningji sung du ju toni ningji ni de sung du ju ne gom ne de ne si si ni gi thali to sipadan shiwa nigar ge thali to wa de thekba chimbo gi lam re kibu chimbo ge lam.
So when we speak of the paths of lesser, middling, and greater beings, we already covered the path of lesser beings, which refers to beings who fear the pain of the lower realms and seek to avoid the pain of the lower realms by taking a good rebirth within samsara. And then the path of middling beings refers to those who don't have such attachment to the pleasures of the higher realms, but instead pursue liberation from samsara as a whole. And then now that we're talking about the path of greater beings, this pertains to the practice of the unity of emptiness and compassion. So that's the key point of the path of greater beings, is to cultivate and meditate upon emptiness and compassion unified. And through doing so, we gain liberation from both the extremes of samsara and nirvana.
Tene da tekba chembo ge dila jorwa jangju sem di gomba dila ni dus kunzo jangju ge sem dang dendam jangju ge sem ni dus dege nani dendam ge jangju ge sem dila dene nyamsha mari kunzo jangju ge sem dila ya ni dus nyamsha ge kapsu dakshin jewa gomba dan jetob ge kapsu tene kenge lamdo kerba ni dus ta danda kapsu baba de thangbo de nyamje gome de cha cha ware danda kapsu baba de ni de jeto kap kenge lamdo kirwa de la yang de ni choose dus yamne chedang choose dus jeto ke kapsu.
So then the practice of bodhicitta here, cultivating bodhicitta, can be categorized as in terms of relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. And we're here dealing with relative bodhicitta, which is further subdivided into two headings. The practice of meditative equipoise, in which we exchange self and other, and then the practice of post-meditation, in which we take negative circumstances onto the path. And so we're now dealing with the second of those points, taking negative circumstances onto the path in post-meditation. And there are 10 practices here that we're concerned with.
Di nangni chugin nangni ta peche chug drosa bare di nang chugi nangni jetu kenge lamdo kerbala midebi chue shi dus midebi deba meba chue shi drosa bare sokawa chue ni di de drosa bare rinkas barba de la jorgu gi chue ni de dang chagdang gi chue ni chagdang lamgir dang jorgu lamgir ni tanda kapsu baba jorgu lamgir ni dus sho di ni di ta guba lamdu kirba dan jorba lamdu kirbas di ni di kapsu baba de tanda ta lep de res tanda ngaransu
Gupa dang jorwa di
jorba
respect jorwa laso
gu sana las
mepagi do chokrwa
re
laso. Okay, so among these 10 points for taking negative circumstances onto the path, there were the how to deal with the 4 things that we don't want. We've already finished those. There were the 2 things that are difficult to bear. We've finished those. And now we arrive at how to take attachment and aversion onto the path. And we're specifically dealing with how to take wealth and respect or good reputation onto the path now.
the ni opposite re chik di ngol chik di chugla ke gi sungyo di chagdang di chugla re jorgu di ngol.
Okay, so there are 2 different points here. One is taking attachment and aversion onto the path, and the other is taking wealth and respect onto the path. So these are opposites.
Da danda kapsu ba jorgu ni lamker der da danda di kapsu baba di guba lamdu kerbas guba di guba lamdu kerba de la dini tsawa di chowe phongshin ta do mi ni sabchen ne da döngi tab yanlar jogin digduk dagla lenji jin shumba me ba jasi la le yin tsawa de de.
So the first of these verses that we'll deal with concerns taking respect onto the path, or and so I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're on
18.
verse 18. Yeah. Okay. Which reads, even though I may be destitute and despised by all, beset with terrible illness and plagued by evil spirits, still to take upon myself all beings' ills and harmful actions without ever losing heart. This is the practice of the Bodhisattvas.
There are the dendere da chowe phongji ta do mi nge chapchen ne da döngi tab yanlar rogin digduk dagla lenji jin shumba me bajase lan le yin se de guba lamkir se de da changju semba namji ta rang dugbuji 초회 퐁스나 다 랑라 양나니 엔데레 당보니 사주 통주 메바 아니 균노르 메바 에 덴데 찍제 니바데 양 당보 란니 랑 축부 힘바직라 치수양 게망보지 테니드니 에 균노르 롱제 상마 양나 꾸마 작바기 키송바 양나 등상이나 셰어 마켓 룩 비즈니스 징도 상마 다운 차 제로 차기도 에 초회 퐁스드니 사야 통에 메와 가야 메죠 근데 니 차소나라의 소외 풍싱 소 매와 차네서래
So here in this verse, forgive me, I think I translated it wrong. It's about taking a loss onto the path. And so when it reads, even though I may be destitute and despised by all, destitute here refers, there's two different ways of being destitute. One is you can never have any wealth in the first place, and the second way is maybe you have wealth at first, but then you lose it all, like in the stock market these days, everything is crashing to zero. And so that's another way to become destitute, is to lose everything that you once had.
찍디 되니 당분이라 매바 균노르 가야 매바 되니 초와사야 매바 풍수도자니 강아체바 당분이 방부 조 되니 우그라.
So this first one we can understand, of course, it's a matter of great adversity to have nothing. We can see that poor people who've always been poor, face great challenges and deal with a lot of difficulties due to their condition.
되니 덴데 중국의 값수 초와 풍 가야 매 균노 롱제 매 비값수 되니 미 nhập 제바 미기 불리 제바 되니 미든족이 아 전화 방고래 저랑 가야 민두선 다른 디간라 nembo first already 가야 매로 균노 롱제 매 니바 다동야 미기 nhập 제바 nhập 제스나 콜라 불리 제바 덴데 지 되니 덴데 nhập 제차 니바 당보 균노 롱제 매 니바 미기 nhập 제 데 땡라 양자 숨바디 데네 찹지 네세 찹침보 네세도 다 등산 나서 망보여라 데 류기 나자 데네 다 나자 다면다 용식이 셈기 나사 셈로 동아 류라 나사 망보지기 테니 아니 찹침보 네제 데야 마임보 숨 차서 데야 마임보 시바 데니 던기 된스나더니 ngaranzo spirit segore 등상도 동제 플라루 뇌진다 된데게 뇌바신 드니 베메세게 다 망보지 시즈 거랑 망보지 레서 you no longer 매바시 네 요바지 네 레바시 미기 녀브지 제바지 아니야 미직부 마임바 드니 지 미마인기 플라루 된소게 안 뇌바신 다 된데지 중소나 가서 간데 용사래 갈리테서라.
And so our troubles don't stop there with just having nothing. It reads, even though I may be destitute and despised by all. So it's not enough that we just have nothing, that we're just poor. On top of that, maybe other people bully us about it. They despise us and denigrate us for being poor, as if being poor wasn't bad enough on its own. And then there's a third point mentioned here that reads, beset with terrible illness. That's something we can understand these days. There's all kinds of terrible illnesses out there now that plague people, illnesses that wreak havoc on our body, as well as illnesses of the mind. And then the fourth point here reads, plagued by evil spirits. So at this point, we're really in dire straits if, on top of being destitute and despised and beset with terrible illness, on top of being victimized by other people, we might fall victim to non-human entities and spirits like devas and nagas and rakshasas, all these different kinds of non-human entities that can cause us problems. And if all of these four things are happening to us at the same time, then we're really in a bad spot.
Tene didao jiki taba ina yang sere. Tene de drogin dikduk dagla lenje zin se ta tene kapsu babu kapsu mi ngarazo kebu mi palbaji ina ta injike ne maso ne give up chigiro aya. Tendriki dunga mangboji ki ona. Ta tele shumba sena ko pa pet koran give up machi bachini shumba machi bachini 장주 sembadenzo khande chigiyoresna teni kono doa tendeki rangla tende kanga yo ba inaya tadung shembagi semje shembagi dikba da dunga 상마 빠 슌바 마임바진 기바 마임바진 마치네 포와 침보치니 되니 콘조게 동아야 추 랭게르스 랭고레스 델라스 달랍도 조긴디도 다글라 렌지진스 슌바 메파 다글라 렌지진스 랭기 키랑라 포와 거르다 당보 어가 nga랑라 덴데 동아 망보지 최송 중송 이나야 nga 다동 nga 유기메스 디 셴바게 심진게 동아 nga랑다 직과 직장 가시라 초합 매바지 가시라 녀주지게 미심바길라 지기요라 되네 등기네 랑라 네 유기 덴데 심제 망보지 통용도 아제 닝제 콘조 다 nga랑라 나자 덴데 독다 여레다 이나양아 가이 차나차 가야미도 네 디심제 탐지기 코 동아든지 시스셔서 덴조데 네기 링기 삼네 되네 지몰람 지바이나 되니 뭐네 장주 선박에 간소거래 냠는 차게 요레스 단다 대값 봐봐 shumba 메바스 다 장주 선박은 솔레 shumba 메레 간조는 shum바시니 기법치 육셔라 되니 되니 나 나서 나시서 또 교부 싫어 쟁아라 시나 약보도 없었는데 미카시기 수사이치 미카시기 담만다 지셔그러 네 장주 선박 다오지는 빠 마shum바시니 로고 최상신 다동 심진기 동아 섬제 수 랭게 요레스 네 장주 선박 남지 랑렌차게 요레스 냠렌차게 요레스
Pani kirangi sungya kibabs sayakti karare.
shumba 메바 코
Shumba meba.
마육 바친 수 렘바 수 레니 셴바기 동아야 레니
So if we as ordinary beings are beset by all these problems, then it would be very easy for us to lose heart or feel defeated. But what are we instructed to do here as bodhisattvas? What is the practice of a bodhisattva in this case? It reads, still to take upon myself all beings' ills and harmful actions without ever losing heart. This is the practice of all the bodhisattvas. So rather than losing heart and falling prey to self-pity, thinking we'd be better off dead, a bodhisattva observes, and it's like, yes, I'm maybe destitute and despised, beset by illness and plagued by evil spirits, but I'm not the only one who suffers in this way. It's very plain to see that many, many people, many other beings suffer in this very same way, or even worse than I do. So I may be suffering from these problems, but who cares about me? There's all these other beings suffering in the same way. So then to make the aspiration prayer, to observe the similar suffering in others and give rise to compassion, and really from the heart make the aspiration prayer, may I take this likewise suffering onto myself, not to try to get rid of it, but to with great courage and fortitude, take on the ills and harmful actions of other beings without losing heart. This is the practice of the bodhisattvas. This is how we turn these conditions into bodhisattva practice.
근데 대 닝도 메바 차 shum바 pene pa shum do se du zani de la che khashi du nge shugi deni khande cha gar na ngarang la nye chu che ba cha gar nyap chu che ya khare charam pa shum na logo me ba cha na te rang la nye chu che ba cha ya da ani rang ning do me ba cha ning do chen sem top chum me ba cha do ya da ani rang dambi chu dubde ge lo de me ba cha do ya khaze pa shum se na ani pena chöchoni dendere jigdengi chona samlotana jigdengi jawa khare lega ji dubde gi lo yona ya teto samba poba nyam dugur pena jigden lega mangbo yara rangla su chongre poba nyam phama pugu chonga la dende na poba nyam dugures ani rang semdi pe mese pa logo chungchu mazena khala gdo bird's heart sig do think the chati gi ning do semba chungchu chagir very sensitive chagir semba sem shin do shumbala and drogi yose de induzani teni tende ki samlo di tanji na shin shumba meba chin teni changju semba na shin gi khona ba teni nangdu te ngara teni chi matub na ya teni molam chin tende ji chang tende ji semji tham ji gi suji nga lentup na konjo dunga konjo gi naza konjo gi chowa meba nyejue changma nga gi lentubar sho nga gi lembar sho samni molam chi to na teni ngai la je pa shumba meba rangi ningdo ba chimbo cha teni jige semshu ga chimbo cha 아니 직댕기 레가에나야 뱀메세게 shumba 쳔보차 빠 쳔보차 아니 최기 통내야 되니 디바 마치바지 최라야 김젠당 아니 지가 락린 치토베다 냠린 치토베기 데 독차도 그래스.
So let's talk for a second about what it means to lose heart. It's said that Bodhisattvas don't lose heart. So losing heart means in this case that the strength of our mind wanes, our motivation to carry on sort of falters, and our persistence to carry out whatever it is that we're doing fails to keep us going. And we can observe that from a worldly perspective, when someone loses heart as a result of being plagued by all these problems, that even their motivation to carry out worldly things wanes, like their motivation to carry out business or raise children or keep a household. People can lose heart with regard to all of these things. But for a bodhisattva to keep themselves from ever losing heart means that even if we're unable as a result of these problems to carry out any given dharma activity that we would have otherwise liked to, or help beings in a material way, we can still make the aspiration to take on the sufferings of beings. And in that way, we can renew our reason for practicing dharma. We can avoid developing what Tulku referred to as a bird's heart, this very sensitive, shallow heart that's discouraged by everything. If we're able to practice in the way that's described in this verse, we can avoid this kind of pitfall.
근데 가시 데데 데데 셈바 충중 데데 중송나 라라 소소라 데니 마랑 하장 약보레 삼고 가시 데데 북부 강한 망부 태소나 나랑 플레 약보레 다 쳐바지 인소나 덴데지 땡고레 나랑 덴지 덩기다 나랑 하장 약보레 삼고레 가레레스나 나랑 라야 북부 데다 중중왈 중 덴데 중왈라 때네 덴네 심제 탐지 동al 따랑 하고 그여라 랑라 용도 심제라 용고여레 직바라다 디 용당디 냠용 직바인도 Dende dende chungdo oh ta ngarang la dende chungso di chungni ngarang ha gowa la te ni semjen la ya dende ji chungu du ta de chungso na ngarang la tanda di gogab ji rakso ngai semjen ki dunga sama chu lengi dende ji lengi dende ji rakso sa me gagor dende gawa samji mayimba dila ya molam ji ne ay ngai semjen thamji chu ngarang la mimbar sho yongbar sho konso kibu yongbar sho ngarang la di sama dubu dungal ki dribu sama ngarang la thobar sho ngala yongbar sho sendaro gagashini totoshin lengures.
And so then how, if we find ourselves getting discouraged or feeling like beating ourselves up or self-deprecating, like like we're losing heart, then what we need to do is actually observe that this is a very, very good thing that we're experiencing. It's actually so great, because on the basis of these awful circumstances that are befalling us, we are presented with the opportunity to understand what all sentient beings experience. Because all sentient beings experience this kind of pain, this kind of discouragement and defeat. And so if we're able to observe that this is actually a great opportunity to develop compassion and camaraderie with all sentient beings on the basis of this shared suffering, then we can not only be at peace with these problems that we face, but enjoy them, wish for more of them, make the prayer, may all such problems that sentient beings face ripen on me, like bring it on to me. This is what we actually come to desire and enjoy.
Dendeji kasi dende chungwa ina teni rangla chigi dendeji len yungdu teni rangi padi shungi mares kosimje dunga sama chu len ni teni rangla molam dende jaba ina ngone ge chige di rangi ngone jina dendeji kasi len tuba ina pa semjingi dunga sel tuba ta jaji jar ta yi me khandeji na rangi kulongdang rangi tila 가족이 정보 지마질라 라리기리 이나야 랑게 단기 초와 매바당 지게 예제 지교의 상마 semba 고양 보차기르스 코드 semba게 레요 semba게 동아 상마 랑게 레 송도 되니 랑게 모네지나 동아디 라사레 신기 동아지 랑게 레 투베기 켈랑라 뽑아 유나 랑 동아데다 빼 충중로 신 동다 망보 치다 망보 심진기 동아수 렌토고요레 때 랑기 동아 단지 삼로 중중 데다고 랑신기 매바차네 단지 디기 랑기 디부 암 야나 사자 마라조 스페이스고라 셈바딜라 고 랑신기 시데 톱고요레스 디 가리 김젤라테 네레스나 잠 잉젤라테니 단지 심진기다 동아 레다 대화 파티에기 디기 다 잉톱티 la teni teni rang la dewa ji thogu yores.
So developing this kind of courage, the fortitude and the willingness to take on all such sufferings of other sentient beings onto oneself is actually very beneficial for ourselves as well, because if we're able to observe and willingly take on the similar suffering of 1,000 other beings, of 10,000 other beings, compared to the scope of this suffering that we're taking upon ourselves, our own suffering, the problems we were dealing with before come to seem very, very small. Our mind naturally becomes much broader and able to accommodate so much more than we were previously able to, because in the face of the suffering of 10,000 beings that we're taking upon ourselves, this suffering, our own suffering, naturally comes to seem very small, and we're able to develop a great strength and courage on the basis of this kindness and compassion that motivates such an aspiration.
Teni di 닝덥 첨보세디 잠바단 잉제니기 단다 냠린 제발라테니 되니 잉덥도 첨보차기 그래서 잠바단 잉제니 라 마데바지 잉덥 첨보차고 말했어.
So this great courage in the heart of a bodhisattva comes about on the basis of loving kindness and compassion. Without loving kindness and compassion, this sense of great courage will not arise for us.
endo ada dende 냠린 직 투바이나 되니 오늘 장주 셈비기 장주 셈바스나레 다 장주 셈바기 냠네 단다 값서 봐봐 자세 무주 통메 낭신 되네 코나바 칸데 낭 되네 낭게 요레스 땡아랑소야 되네 지 냠네 지 톱게 요나 다 코나바 낭신기 자지 갸 단다 아랑소라야 된데기 뉴바 요 마레데 이나야다 지 몰람 지니 셈제 탐지기 동안 알라 토버쇼 삼바 된데지 중바 이나데 자선남지 라렌 차게 요레스.
So the author of our text, Gyaltse Togme Sangpo, he really did practice in this way. He really did take other beings' suffering upon himself and allow thieves and robbers to walk off with his possessions. And whether or not we're able to practice to the same degree that he was able to remains to be seen. But if we're able to, at the very least, make the aspiration, may I truly practice in this way, in the same way that Gyaltse Togme Sangpo did, then this aspiration itself becomes a practice of the Bodhisattvas.
Oh, this that didi guba lamdo kerbas dire sarsonde that deni tanda niba di jorwa lamdo kerbas.
So that verse concludes the practice of taking loss onto the path, and so what follows is the practice of taking wealth or gain onto the path.
Deni jorwa lamdo kerba dila tanda di nyembar dashin romang chibu tu namtwe bui noda top jurjang sibi paljur nyingbo mesig ni kengba meba jase lani yinsi tu zawat di jurkure.
So the corresponding verse here reads, it's verse 19, even though I may be famous and revered by all, and as rich as Vaishravana, the god of wealth himself, to see the futility of all the glory and riches of this world, and to remain without conceit, this is the practice of the Bodhisattvas.
Nyembar dashin romang chibu tu se de nyembar daksi tu zani ngarangzo famous cha edre ta pe mi kira chumbo cha ta kira chumbo chechong ni kira chumbo cha ed jigdin chong ni kira chumbo cha ed ne mangbo yore chechong ni cha and kira chumbo se tu zani nyembar daksi tu ta chapra chumbo cha ne dingsangi celebrities rawre na gyuchukbu re na spiritual ta chechong ne sambo tan lama denjo re tugu kembo ta tene mangboji dingsan keba denjo re nyembar dashin domang chiu tu se de do mangbo doa mangbo se na doa mangbo mi mangbo pena kerangi wagla kerangla pe zini kyap chini tene kerangi wagla ta mi tongda mangbo mi kerangla zigi kerang karelam ta dingsan lama kembo tugu denjo la ta mi mangbo zigi do chiu tu se to khorang go gang la shani ta kare ka nang na nyingi yor mi denjo ta yin ta ming re ani keta chumbo re mi mangbo kerang la loma mangbo yona re kerang la follower mangbo yona re ani yang de ma ni che ta nyemba keta chumbo chik che ani mi mangbo kerang wala degi factory yuchubu denzo wala lega chingen yore lama loma bena kembo tugu denzo wala mi mangbo yore ani ta celebrity denzo wala mi mangbo yore dende chi ni che 아니 남트 부이 not top your chance 남트 부이 시두자니 남트스 잠발라 아 다디 famous thingsa dorje tekba na 잠발라 ngajo sama peshaji rana ten 잠발라 sakta chokpa chu 남트스 세나 how area 잠발라 세다 잠ser 잠발라 serpu 남트스 세 di kongi chenla di dabo ge namde se dabo ge ta nor khong ta norbu yin se ge namde se ti nor ge na ni galbo king ta khon na sing gi tingsang ge samlo ta na bill gate dao ta khare kare alone mass re ga re ching mangbo ju to tingsang world richest man den jo ta khon jo ge chubu yin se ge ra ta nor longje chubu nyen da chenbo chanang la ne loma mangbo tende 상마를 가르라게 해서나 시비 발조르세 시파 디 직대비기 롱저르 마도 직대네 데비기 롱저디 마레 따디 롱저 덴데 쳔보지 여송나 딜라 닝보 민도스 발조르 가르에나 델라도 닝보 메시그네스 가르에서나 따디 송자나 야 릉부 차사레
Tikadula. So to unpack what this verse means, the first line reads, even though I may be famous and revered by all, we know what famous means, to be renowned. We can be renowned in a worldly sense, renowned as or famous as a worldly person, or we can gain fame as a Dharma person as well, be renowned as a very spiritual person, as a lama, a tulku, a khenpo, or a great expert. And as such, we may be revered by all, meaning that many other people celebrate us and pay us respect, treat us with great reverence, bowing their heads and minding where we walk. This may be because they consider us to be a very spiritual person or a lama, or because maybe we own a big factory with lots of workers who pay us lots of respect. This is what being revered by all means. And we may also become as rich as Vaishravana, the god of wealth himself. So Vaishravana is better known as Zambala these days. Everybody loves Zambala, Zambala this, Zambala that. Specifically, Vaishravana is a gold Zambala, and everybody who wants to practice the Vajrayana specifically wants to do gold Zambala puja. Is a very popular deity, and we can understand the wealth of Vaishravana as he's like the king of wealth. And so a more tangible example might be an extremely wealthy person like Bill Gates or Elon Musk. And so no matter which of these we experience, fame, reverence, or extreme wealth, we need to understand that this is the splendor of samsara. It's a worldly splendor that's subject to decay. It's not riches that lie beyond the world.
The Ningbo message do that the Rigi Kerala Kor Mangbo Yanare, fame Mikira Chumbo Inare, Longju, that Konjunashi. Ngaranzo and then generation mangbo bar to be yuna pesha than the yun you paljo nam this set about zohe mejo you longje than the yuna yang the ningbo me said kogori ningbo me said that ningbo mes and karizin sigersana kerang la nyenda chumbo ina kaze kera chumbo ina yang the nyenda kera chumbo the prominent mare do you the degi mare Tantanda negapji drink degiri kashi drink de kera chumbo sani yang lamsa kera chumbo de meba cha dogure mi shimba ji kera cha ngure yang nani nimaji ko midak pare ani chela ngeme re khadushi mashi ha go mare ko khi sona yang kera de dawachi ni ji lagire de jila abenish laksar keran kera mere ko dawachi ni ji shi chana ya tarun degiri de jila no more yang nani statue ji sha gyure dirang re Chimba kaya mere, ko nyingbo mere. Tene di kor ta chiwur tugen kirang la pe tsini mi mangbo kor mangbo kirang la tsini ase kare lamna nyemba ena da lama la loma mangbo tene mi khashi ki factory la mi mangbo nyen dege ena re nimaji nyingbo mere ko yang tembo mere Tsering yana sanyi nimaji kandachina yung ni dogo res te midagbe rangshin re takbe rangshin mare te induzani nyingbo me sigere Teni yang longju ina ya da Bill Gates ina re Elon Musk ina re Zambala ki gyuno longju tanda kirang la korwa dilai ngarang la yo na teni da negab jire yo ringa la kirang zo ga ha hu ji ki pu ji tang sa khangba nyu morda nyu teni to sa de na ma do khola ya ngeba mere khadu ta sanyi nani teni chige ngeme se du zani nima ji yung roju re delay nyingbo me re ser nyingbo me se dil se ge ko midabe rashi indu ya kashi chukbu chane dango chukbu chane sanyi zero chage yore dango gera chumbo de tiring bum se ma jar ni kera mewa chage yore kede da meda chane midabe rashi indu ko le nyingbo me se re
So we describe the verse describes the futility of all the glories and riches of this world. And so we need to understand this term futility, or futile, Ningpo Mepa in Tibetan. And what this means is that it's not permanent. You can be extremely famous today and tomorrow everyone's forgotten about you because we don't know when we're going to die or how we're going to die, and when we do die it's not like being famous helps us very much. It may be that people mourn our death and remember us for a couple of months and then put up a statue and then that's it, no more, everyone forgets about us. And the same with being revered. If you're a lama with many students paying you respect, or the boss of a factory with many workers paying you respect, that's not permanent either. That can all fade in the matter of a day or two. Today you can on a big factory and the next day it's gone, or the next day we die. It's futile, it doesn't last. And when we look at somebody like Bill Gates or Elon Musk, it's as if we can see the wealth of Vajravana himself here in samsara in the form of these super wealthy people. But it doesn't matter how many cars or houses you can buy with such wealth, eventually it's either gonna run out, the stock market can nosedive and tank, or we have to part with it when we die. It's futile because it doesn't last. It is impermanent by nature.
Karirezana Diwala Ningbo me dini Kengba me bajase lalin yinsi do ta dilan khoeji yore Kengba me bajase lalin se di dindire khaji kirangla nyendak chimbo jubaljor namde se tabo yona nyendak chimbo pe mese nyendak chimbo yona tene kirangla khor loma dende mangbo yona guba chigi mangbo yona kari yungursina Kengba yunguri Kengba da gyakpa se chikpare ngajal Kengba da gyakpa yona ngajal yunguri Keng se do garisena ngala chuga yo mare ngala keta chewa su yo mare ani ngala yang khor longje chewa yo mare se do ngajal yunguri Keng pek pena chu kap nangla khang Keng de na deni lu dugura ta nyendak chimbo Keng longje King korloma guba chingi mangbo King yungdu tin Kengba chaodu ngaja chagri ta ngale sugang la khage mare ngale cheo suyo mare ngale chuge suyo mare ngaja yodu ti khare chagri korwa gi gyuzo ngaja re Kengba da jagba yona chanju gi simjule ke gmar karasan nga chigbu samlo ta yungura ti yungdu chanju gi simjule ke la barje yungur ta di mebar chewala ningbo me se hago 오, 다 나라 규에나 주민도 닝부민도 되네 Kare Nyenda Yana Chumindu Ningbu Mindu, that Ningbu Mindu said to Kirangi Kangba the Yakba the Meva Chagger. Nyuru Chagger. Nyuru Chana Kiran, Naja Meva Chara, Naja Majalna, Shen Jal, Shen Chukbure, Shen Nyanda Chumbores and a Pala, Council or Chanju is same Jamda Inji Ki Kangba me on the Jamba Inji Jula Kigres.
So then the final line in this verse reads, to remain without conceit. This is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. And so what do we mean by conceit here? We think about these things that we've talked about, like wealth and fame and glory. What is the result of these things? It's conceit. We become conceited or puffed up with pride. The Tibetan word kangpa, Tulku demonstrated you can use it for a cup. If you pour too much water into a cup, it overflows, it can't contain what's put in there. And this is the same word that we use for conceit. We become too puffed up and overblown and self-important with pride. And this is a huge obstacle for Bodhisattva practitioners, because if you're puffed up with pride, if you're overly self-important, then you can't generate bodhicitta because you're only focused on yourself. And so if you're able to avoid becoming conceited, even when you do have wealth and fame and all of that, if you can remember that it's futile, it has no essence, there's nothing permanent about it, there's nothing particularly special about it, and you can reduce the level of conceitedness that arises on the basis of these things, then to the degree that we can reduce our own self-importance, we consider others as more important. And that's the practice of the Bodhisattvas, to develop bodhicitta like this.
Ningbo me said the Zo di meba Ngajal the Kangba meba Chayagi Zo di Naranzula Ningbo meba the Hakosona. That Mida Veranshi Bahakosona, the Ning Kangba than Yakbani meba Chagre, di meba Chasona, Chanjusim Guleke la Lenhaba Chagres.
So the main point here is to understand how fame, reverence, and wealth are futile. They are impermanent by nature. And if we're able to understand this and observe this, then we will be able to reduce our pride and our self-importance. And on that basis, be able to generate a bodhicitta and practice in the manner of bodhisattvas.
Any did abogi Sibi Baljingbo me sickness as Dendru Tama Ningbo meba Hakoba ina. Tini Kangba meba. Ngaja meba Chagres, Naja meba, Yakba meba Chawati. Tini Jase Janju Semba Gulek Janju Gisem the Gulekeba ina. Tini Janju Gisem Yamlin Che di Chi Tupureda Chigen de la Tini, Dene Chigen Jilla, Jase Laglen, Jasu Janju Semba Laglen, Tini Nangi Ures, and Ramba Raya Chibaina, Tini Janju Gisem Nyamle Chagi Ures, Kazi Dene Chitubaina.
So to recap, if once we see that the wealth and splendor of samsara is futile and impermanent, we can give up our pride, give up our conceit and self-importance. And on this basis, then precious bodhicitta will be able to take birth in our being. And if we're able to generate a bodhicitta like this, then this is the basis for practicing in the manner of bodhisattvas. This is the root of the practices of the bodhisattvas.
Tadi tandi nyingbo mese di kirang namba ta sigi enan dani tanda ngaranzu peja mangbo nangla midaba kapsu sinaya wori chinu jigden la samdi midaba nangju simjin la samdi midaba se di midaba kapsu doa dani kandi jena changma midaba rangshin chenpo danzo ma lung dani zigbu damji mi zigbu zema changma rangshin ki gedro ni gibu gimu changdo subda mi jo cha ta danzo changma midaba rangshin danzo midaba kapsu la sinaya wori res.
So when we say futile, to see the futility of things, we can understand this in the context of the teachings on impermanence that we encounter over and over again in Dharma teachings and scriptures. The outer world is impermanent. What is big falls down. Beautiful, handsome people will age and become decrepit, and of course everybody dies, and so we should understand the futility of samsaric wealth in terms of their impermanent nature.
Dadi jurgu ni lamdu kirwa de tsare guba lamdu kirwa dan jorwa lamdu kirwa ni de tsarwa res.
So with these two verses, we conclude the practice of taking loss and gain onto the path, respectively.
Tamani di chuba na geba tsarta guwa dan chuba ni di dire chagdang ni lamdu kirwa se di res. Tanda di kapsu baba shedang dan chagba ni lamdu kirwa.
Okay, so now what comes next is the practice of taking attachment and aversion onto the path.
Tangbo di da shedang lamdu kirwa se di redu peze chuze da simdo.
La.
Chuze jik dodwa.
Re, chuzo chigdo.
Chuze tsarwa, chuze jik tsadwa.
Chuzo zoksong.
Laso, teni tering de la tsamsha. Shedang dan chakba lam chawyu lamdu kirwa nyi di jema shugos. Ten tiwa daya na tiro nas.
Okay, so since we have already used up the hour, we'll leave it here for today, and we'll cover taking the objects of aversion and attachment onto the path tomorrow. So now if anyone has any questions, they can ask them in the chat box.
Konaba kale dues. Yamlin pe abore kale dues.
Is this difficult for you guys? Are you guys experiencing difficulties that you can practice with?
Sigla ta na siglen la bo doa yina ngone su rangi nyamlen la su jare ona dos khabo yongzare. O chikleps tiwach.
If we have not realized our true nature yet, how can we avoid becoming masochist rather than altruist? So, sengi nelo matoki ngon la rangi rang la topo tanken mayempa ngone tane shempen tanken kantes chagore. Nelog matogna.
Nelog matogna re ina nelog tokma nangshin tangi pena jase ngoju thome khong nangshin ting arangzo le thangbo ba indu chitugwe ma di indu jani changju semba se di jamba da ningji ni gyaja ngapju su dom yongdu deni 냠레 지네 되네 장주 셈바선 차기 요레스 장주 셈 냠레 지긴들라 디인도 나랑서 당보 기부 레 당보바기 잠바다 닝제라 때니 셈 몰람다오 심제 탐제 딕바 다 딕비기 드부 둥알기 드부 다 데사마 나랑라 멤버 쇼스네 멤버 심게다 지네 되네 지 지도바 쇼스 칼레 야나니 심제 탐질라야 믹박 제사게 율디 지 마툼나야 심제 탐질라 지 마툼나야 되니 단다 값수 바바 랑기 파마 빙야 되니 족보 정모 된조 칼레카 값수 심제 찍라 믹나 디기리 니라 믹나 디기리 숨라 믹나 디 시nga 투 라나소스 가줄레 믹 투구도 딜라 믹바 율체네 믹나 되니 냠네 지나야 디기레스 레 당부 인도 나랑조야 다 나라조 콩게 숭당다나 셈기 디 가서거래 지게 상계 나신 전주선바 나신 콘주 남신 지 참마도 마투병도 나랑조라 capacity 메로아 ability the capacity 메도 투고 말을 라이온도 이나야 레레니레라 투구라 코나바다 다 녀린 착당 메바치니 심제 탐제라 녀린 착당 메바친 투고여서 나랑조다 가지 용나야 녀링 뉴뉴문 친이 당보 당보 녀링지 랑기 파마 빈자시 된 칼레 스트레인저 되니 칼레 에니미 되니 녀링 차다 메바 장주기 셈 오네 친 되니 도바 줄레께 냠바께 응구르마도 당보 도바 께 차네 되니 심제 탐질레 펜도스네요 말 냠부 도거라 던지 랍도 장주기 셈 택바 첨보 값수 장주기 셈당 셰랍 니 시네 되니 시시니기 탈레 데바시 냠네 냠복치니 시시니기 탈레 데네 산지 고방 톱거를 마도 당보 톱네 양 심지기 도된 치즈요 말어 냠부 도그레스.
So it's actually not the case that we have to realize our true nature, and only then can we practice benefiting beings on the Buddhist path. The wisdom of realizing the true nature and the skillful means of practicing loving kindness and compassion are practiced together as a unity. They go hand in hand. So for us as beginners, if we don't have the capacity to have the kind of realization that a Buddha or Bodhisattva has, or they perfectly realize the true nature and they're able to perceive all sentient beings with equanimity, we don't have that capacity, so we have to start where we are and practice both wisdom and compassion together step by step. So maybe we can't see all sentient beings as equal at first, but we can gradually reduce our attachment and aversion to our parents and family, and then expand outward to strangers, and then expand outward to enemy, and gradually step by step work with both wisdom and love and compassion, while making the aspiration that the suffering of others ripen upon us. This is the bodhicitta in aspiration. So we should understand that this is an aspirational prayer, if that helps.
Dire le tangbo yenare chanju gesemdi jamba da ningje la yul de la jamba da ningje ni sha tene di nyambo la jamba da ningje ge nyambo la ne sherab ge tsisin pena kira simjin chik la jamba ningje gombu ge na simjin chik let go tongba ni sha ni let go simjin ni la jamba ningje gombu ge na simjin ni la let go tene tongba sherab rangshin ge tsisin du di nyambo let go sum la jamba ningje ke yang let go chana sum ge zimba am ngaja rang ge zimba shi lam ngaja shi du gre tene sum la ngara shen che par zimba cha rang che par zimba de ma shik du gre tongba ni ge tsisin yong du tene nyambo sherab da jamju sambe ni tsisin ya ga tene simji thamje la nyering chakdang me se du 착바다 나와 매바디 가르스네 셰랍게 찌신니 되니 잠닝제 장주게 셈다 셰랍니기 마더와 아니 숭죽인 고방 토병도 들 상지 고방 시기.
So it's like this as beginners we practice love and compassion, bodhicitta, together with wisdom by sealing them with wisdom. So if we're able to cultivate love and compassion for one being, then we're also able to let go of one being. If we can cultivate love and compassion for two beings, then we're able to let go of two beings and thereby see the emptiness of the objects that we're cultivating compassion towards. And so naturally, as we practice love, compassion, and bodhicitta, the wisdom or the emptiness element is there until gradually, when we're able to see all sentient beings with the eyes of equanimity, then wisdom and bodhicitta will have become a perfect unity, completely inseparable.
Then shen cheper zimbadi rang tanda ngazo shen rang cheper zimbajin kowa cham de gyores. Kaze ge simjen la le tang tu ba na simjen ge chedu chi tu ba na jamba da ningje la ten chi tu ba na rang cheper zimbadi nyungro cha gyumzen kharasana sherab ge zisin res.
And so on the basis of practicing like this, we're able to reduce our self-cherishing and our self-clinging. On the basis of love and compassion, we can grow to cherish others, and to that degree, our self-cherishing, which is the cause for wandering in samsara, can be reduced until it is gone entirely, and then we're free from both the extremes of samsara and nirvana through the practice of bodhicitta sealed with the wisdom of the view.
Nipadi
jigten chöge social media pechatang pekapla jigten chöge la langma shortap karadas.
Oh, that they did Judin Chugela addictic draw, addictic Machai Kandichigures, and the Jigdin Chugi de la addictic Machai Tanda Jigdin Chugila around the same ying there, the addictic Chagi, Gumzito, the Karichagazana, said Dilla Shimba Chimbo Chan, said Dilla Shimba. Around the said Digi that Ngobo Chigi, Yula, same ying digger. That's a dilla shemba dogai geche do khari gom garsana di gom gare dajunye gaba ta midag ba di se di gi shemba dogai che do dajunye gaba da midag ba yabo gom gare di yabo gom sona se di gi shemba jigden chuji lo dogires kasi se jema la ya da se jema nga yabo ji yongbar sho sene yang se jema ge che do chikbu chie ina lo dende chikbu ji le sona Dini midak badan le jumre yakbo waji gomna se chima da korwa la kaya jikdin chuki la lagaya ki dende ji na midak badan di le jumre di gomba ina se chima ya kenyi dugu mare nga sanji goban top ya na tharba thamji kempi goban la mathom na se chima ya kibu mindu sen korwa la nyeba di korwa la dunga yoba ha gugurwa le jumre la teni That's dilla shemba tal jigden loki lo tanga ge chedo yakshu de dajukni ga wada midagbo gom kores jang yang do gom kor ache nga ngone milurumbo je top duk ta milurumbo je top na thola ganji tangae thola madang tanda gogob yakbo opportunity very fortunate love tani midagba I di ganse korsana I don't want to waste love jigden chukela shemba macha wachini ya midagba rangin nimaji khadi dro mando ha go mindu milurumbo je yakbo je top mato hakugu mari di indu nga thola tangi mes social media da dende lo thola madang wachini ngone gyumsen yakpo chigla tona tegi samni teni midaba da dajunye ga gomna jigden choje lo dog to gres.
So the main reason we become addicted to the 8 worldly concerns, whether it's in terms of social media or otherwise, is that we're caught up in distraction because we're grasping to the concerns of this life, this particular life, hoping that things go well for us and our loved ones in this life, and being fixated on just this very life. And the way to counteract that is to meditate again and again on the preciousness and rarity of attaining the freedoms and advantages of a human birth, and also reflecting again and again, really all the time, till it becomes second nature, on how impermanent everything is, including this precious human life. And then also, of course, meditating on the cause and effect of karma and the defects of samsara. And through bringing this to mind again and again, especially impermanence, the impermanence of this human life of ours, we can motivate ourselves not to waste our time. We have this precious human life, but whether or not it's put to good use is hard to say, but we know that time is running out. And so for that purpose, since we know we don't want to be reborn in samsara again, and we know the basis, the causes and conditions on which Buddhahood is attained, or rebirth in samsara is taken once again, then we can really motivate ourselves to not waste time worrying about social media and the 8 worldly concerns that come through to us through social media.
Jigden choge se de da se de jigbure nyambar ta se da chubu cha se da de se de la shemba yona jigden choge yue bare jigden choge la samdo ta on chue ya bo dup mare de lo doge ge chedu da jungye ga wa da midaba kom gre se de le shemba doge ge chedu yana ka so ga naming pa meba che chedu da yakshu de da jungye ga wa midaba se di se chima ge shemba doge chedu teni 나중에 가 말에 건다 le junde da khorwi nyemi komgo res se chima shimba doge chedu.
So really the 8 worldly concerns, being attached or obsessed with wealth, being obsessed with fame and so forth, we can counteract the attachment and the distraction that results from being attached to this life by contemplating the rarity of the freedoms and advantages, as well as the impermanence of life. And then we can counteract attachment to our future life or our next life by meditating on the cause and effect of karma and the defects of samsara. So in this way, the 4 thoughts that turn our mind away from distraction respectively turn our minds away from attachment to this life as well as future lives.
Midaba yakbod gomsona pena naming la shira naming dugu mar kharsana ngaranzo lep pangla kasi dul daw jena me daw shor yana dul jiglep sona ngazo lamso se sheni pa yugura o dena shi chagire ti naming sama pa yugdugre sheni midaba gomba ina ani lamsang ko chik lega yakpo kimsen yakpo meaningful gi life chigla samlo tangire yana chwe de da yena mena chwe teni chwe la dongnan tigire chwe la tundri chagire naming jigden chwe la shira zimba yungu mares chungu mares midapa de yabo gomna.
So if we really meditate on impermanence, this is how it should be. Imagine you're sitting there and a snake falls into your lap, or your lap catches fire. You're immediately going to startle and jump up and throw the snake away or put out the fire. You're not going to waste any time distracted worrying about the worldly concerns. You're going to get right on it. And that's how it is supposed to become with our Dharma practice when we really take death and impermanence to heart. We understand that our time is fleeting and that we need to live a meaningful life. We need to focus on living a meaningful life, and whether or not our life becomes meaningful is a matter of whether or not we practice the Dharma. So if we understand that time is running out in this way, then we won't waste any time being distracted on anything else.
Ini dice sumba di
Ani sumba di Vietnamese ke gane tiwa nilak tu yinayang nga haragoma song. Can the Vietnamese translator translate these questions? Oh, you
Bodhichitta. Condition cultivate Bodhichitta redwa. Karsana somebody Budnami chet.
Oh, laso ani inji kegones is somebody nga thongma songgomba. Ani Changchup semke dang samten gi nyamlen nyamde gantes gomgore kainsana semchen tamchela mikna samten nam samadhi lamsang shogitus.
Ye danji ngai gongla tangsho gi thiwa chikba dore. Samadhi shorse du shores na mixe shores na enerda ngarazo le thangbo indo khatu ina pena chikbar ngai pe dauji shana ngarazo marathon gyuksang langirwa kilometer chu nishu ngazo thangbo gyuktugu mara ngarazo thangbo training yakbo chayo mares thangboran simje thamji gi chedu sedu jani ani simje thamje la mikpa shungdugu mare ani something la yang around la nyamnyung bakcha yakboji medu semba des korwal tatse thongma mebani korwal khamyungdu nganzola bakcha nyomongba zimba segore le segore pe thupoyer de do le thangborang ngarangzo something tempoji yungaya da teni salboji yungaya da jangjugi sem juleke thubeje khale khakpores Tindu thangbo ta changju gisem lo jangayala teni marathon jugu na kilometer chik jugur thangbo training teni ni jug sum ju shi jug teni kale expansion kilometer chu ni shu jug thu gres de na je ngarango semba de la thangbo nyomongba tipa tikba mangbo ju ye ongdo jani thangbo semjin chik la mik ane semjin chik let go ngai lai ba samadhi semji sin rang chebar jimba de lo tang Shenche Brazimba lo shukches pate tubegi nuba samadhi segora tingzin di gula nyamnyung yakbo jang. Tene chik jang, yene chik tupsana ni jang, ni tupsana sum jang tupgure, tubegi ganasana rangla nuba yore. Dende chini jangur mado ta chik do lamsang korang ki tanga semye mangbol migi samadhi do tupgu mindu tupgu mare kale kakbore.
So is a similar process that Tokala described in answering the first question. We practice these things together, focusing on cultivating bodhicitta for all beings is like running a marathon. If we just got up and tried to run a marathon right now, we couldn't do it, could we? We'd need to train first, and we can't just immediately start by running 24 miles. Tukula said kilometers, but I don't know how long a marathon is in kilometers. But we have to start by running 1 mile. And so like Tukula described previously, first, if you can focus on cultivating bodhicitta for one being, then you can let go of just that one being, and that's the samadhi or the wisdom aspect. And then we, on the basis of this training, we can gradually expand. Like first we get good at running a single mile, and then we work up to running 10 miles, and then work up to running an entire marathon. But if from the very beginning we say to ourselves, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to focus on all sentient beings without exception, it's just not going to happen. We need to build up to that, and our samadhi and our gradual cultivation of bodhicitta go hand in hand like that.
The and number in a number sumju bardona tangbo chigni gozu guras number tangbo ran sumju like ligmindo 0 then chi ni sum 1 2 3 4 then 30 lig mato tangbo ran 30 lig mares chikpare ngarang zo semba dila nyamnyung mere changju ge sem de nyamnyung mere ta ina ngarang zo ge changju ge sem di ngarang zo ge devarshik bi ningbo se na ngarang ge sem gi ngo dila yore changju ge sem yore sheraba yore ina yang yobade ha mako mathong ngo mashi yengdo korwale kyam 다 korwale kyame gyumzen zo de kanasna marik pare marik ulateni nyomomba lateni dazin lateni ta korwale kyam yongdo teni mangboji tiba a segore bakcha tukbuji yoderes di indozen bakcha digi ngarangzo barjere ta bakcha dilateni ngarangzo semdi negi yo mare shini temboji negi yo mare 장주 ki semdiya ngarangzo la chembuke tukbu yo mare kanasa ngarangzo bakcha tukbuji yores di induzane ngarangzo la gyudi yore 장주 ki sem gyu yore samadhi ki gyu yore ta ina ya sirdi yore da ken materes ken siduzane jungshi indo pena sabin tabna flower when you put seed you need condition 5 elements to grow the element di the tapre kale jine tapshi la tenedini gyudi mingoresya ngara rangla yobigi changju gi sem di min kale chero min yongdo ani nimaji ngaranzo changju semba yana sangye chagri madu tandarangda mari gyule yores ngara potential yores.
So it's like a counting numbers. You have to start from 0, then go to 1 and 2 and 3. You don't just jump straight to 30. That's not how numbers work. And likewise, we know our true nature, the essence of our mind is Buddha nature. We have the cause for perfect samadhi and perfect bodhicitta already present within our true nature, but we can't see that nature. We don't understand it. We're not well acquainted with it because the basic reason for this is ignorance. And on the basis of ignorance, negative emotions arise and self-clinging arises on the basis of that. And gradually our habitual patterns that are rooted in ignorance and the afflictions and so forth get thicker and thicker and thicker and make it impossible for us to see the reality of our true nature. And these thick habits are obstacles to the cultivation of bodhicitta and samadhi that are already present within our Buddha nature. Tulku spoke in English a little bit about how when you plant a seed, you need the conditions of the 5 elements for the seed to grow properly. And likewise, the seed is already present inalienably in our nature. We have the potential of the Buddha nature, but we need to cultivate that through the conducive conditions, which in this case are the methods that we're describing. Through gradually working with the methods, we can bring the seed or our Buddha nature to fruition.
The last question.
Tamadi, put this in the context of the war like we are currently experiencing. What is the correct view of Bodhisattva taking suffering as the path while witnessing the suffering of others? So, Ukraine la maxong kyape kapla Changchutsem pe Tonglen Dakshin Jewa Nyamlan Cheak the
Better witness.
Witness na Shindaki Dogna Tong Pekapla Makchangi Gone Nyamlan Contest Chegore.
The Changju sem gi nyable tar ngarang zo da Changju sem nyamne chidan Changju sem pa gi ngone sikdang ina ti khorwa dila ningbo meba khorwa di sugen di to da ni ngai shu bana shi marik bare ma khan jin gyab gi yore gyumzen la ta korma to ma chi bu mi shi gi du mi jik se gi du se na digi yo mare di ma khan jin shu re shi de meba khare jin cha re shi de meba sugen di su re samlo ji ta ona mi re mi di ta mi lubu gi sugo mare sem di sugo sem di chagdani gi wang du son chakpa da tangwa chakpa se du zimba shor jagab ji sa go ten shedang ge ma meba se cha me dang shimba de rang chakpa jagab su nyare gi chedu de rang che jing gi chedu shen la meba se ta di jangju sem gi nyamne tak tak opposite cha de go maimba cha do go 이 차에 김전 났다 온도 장주 선바되기 청마할 닝지 게임을 즉 작업 마작비 마잡니 미망보 세겐들라 닝지 기그레 시겐라 닝지 기그레 가르스나 따용도 전에 오늘 지나 세겐라 닝지 마게 고야 다오지레 다 나랑도 장주 선바 근원이 따당 삼라다는 코 레사게 아니 찌기 다 페나 녜마 페다지레 심진 세긴 강사데다 심진 시계 강 시긴기 강사 니들라 저랑 술래 잠닝제 망게 거래선 지와지 땅나 미카시 아제 닝제 시긴들 닝제 거래 라기로 시긴제라 다 돈도 세긴 오네 삼도 땅오나 세긴들 닝제 거래세 세긴들 가르르스나 세긴데게 레소게 시긴데 가시기 거랑 레기다 시도고요레 아니 가가데 레사바지 속되게요라 세겐디 디엔도자네 세겐다 다 장주 셈바터 삼로다나 디기 균젠라 삼로다니 규 가르치니 셈젠라데 셰당 차당 니라다니 고 장주 셈바 남 얘기 된들라다니 시그니 아니 장주 셈 냠네 지게요레스 땅아랑서 더보에나 디게요라 다 마잠네 마자 균젠데 가르 미망보시 뭐네 종로고여 닝제 야갑포라 메바 차도고요레 된조그 동안 삼아 줄레 yang di dunga di chu leni pa ma jabgin jiro konzo dugjare konzo mi dugjare lamna dige mare chakpa le ngur a dawa le ne chigla chakpa chagre chigla dawa chan korwa yu chaksar chig dunga di chu le phajo dia mi mangbo segi to ningji ko ta chig marik bal korang chak dawa dige chini mi mangbo je sok ro digba mangbo sa 코에 닝제 코데 마사와쇼 콜라야 텐데지 약보지 장주기 심지 줄레 깨버쇼 삼로 땅나 데니 니가라 펜투그레스 냠네 곰툼나 다 삼로 땅 툼나네 마툼나니 칼레 가보라야 나라조
When we look at a situation like the war in Ukraine, then we have to ask ourselves, what is it that motivates a human being to kill another? And not just one human being to kill one other human being, but entire armies of human beings to slaughter other people en masse and destroy their country and try to take it for themselves. The culprit in this case is, of course, other people, but what motivates people to behave in this way is their afflictive emotions, particularly anger towards people they conceive of as an enemy, or attachment, wanting to steal the land of another or something like this. And so this kind of afflictive emotion that we're seeing raging here, this is what creates samsara as a whole. We can see the creation of samsara as a whole play out in this case. And it's not the case that, so we can observe the tremendous suffering that beings are experiencing as a result of this war, and like it was instructed today, try to make the aspiration that it ripens upon ourselves, but not in the case of saying it's like, oh, these people are the victims, may I take their suffering upon me, and the aggressors, they're bad people, screw them. I'm not gonna take their suffering on me. That's not how it works for bodhisattvas, because we can observe that the aggressor is creating a terrible situation for themselves. If we ask who is more worthy of compassion, who's in a greater state of suffering, the person who's being killed or the one who kills them, almost everyone would certainly answer, oh, the person who's being killed has it worse off, is more worthy of compassion, if you will. But if you think about it, the answer may in fact be that the killer is more worthy of compassion, because they're creating unspeakable karma for themselves. The person who's dying is just dead. The person who's committing murder is bringing that karma upon themselves that will certainly ripen as horrible suffering for them in the future. And this is all on the basis of their confusion and their afflictive emotions. And so we should really strive to see the root of this conflict in the afflictive emotions of the people fighting the war, and then make the aspiration to take all of the suffering of everyone involved, both the aggressors and the victims, onto ourselves, because they're both suffering tremendously.
Sidang one samlo tana dendere ina chik nambala deni mi one shidogen dezo le tanda mise nyingje pugu lakbartu pugu chungjung gebo gemo deni innocence gido mi mangboje chongrugu do shidugu do dila tayo na deni konzo rang semba dila nyingje raji ngone rangsing ike ngura sa mi mangboshi dugu nyangi do trene deni konzo ga danji ngazo chu danji gingwela jige dunga sangma chu le rangi lenchi konzolo dunga de machungbar sho di dunga de ngal tobar sho ngal nyongbar sho sen samlo ta ona changju semba gi nyamle cha du res.
And so specifically, it's likely the case that when we see people being killed, especially innocent people, small children, old men and old women being murdered in this terrible war, then compassion can arise quite naturally in us. And if on the basis of that we can make the heartfelt aspiration, may their suffering ripen upon me instead. May I experiencing their suffering so that they don't have to. Then this becomes a practice of the Bodhisattvas. I forgot to mention last time an important part, developing compassion for both the victims and the aggressors in this case is very difficult for all of us.
Tapena shembaji mi kanga tiangdu dila jamba ningje se di ke de len labores. Kotong de ge raka shemba kanga do ache ningje sambaji yonge len labore. Ina shemba dra dila ngone jangju ge sem ge de pe kale khabor de ngone jangju semba chibu ge dangbo dende ke thugres nyeri chakdang mes dir da. Rangi nyin cholada rangi kanga thege midila de ningje se de len labore. Ina dala ningje se de kale khabores.
So when we see people being terribly abused, then it's really easy to develop compassion for them, right? That for a person that we perceive as the enemy or the aggressor, developing compassion for them is comparatively very difficult.
Kasi dila dila yang sedang jigenge yul dila ngone jangju gisim yakbu jitke to ba na tene jangju sem ba ngone chagres.
But if you're able to develop real compassion and bodhicitta even for your enemy, even for the aggressor who is abusing others through their anger, if you can develop bodhicitta for them too, then you really become a bodhisattva.
Aina tangbo ngarang le tangbo indu kale khapores ti indu tangbo ngone ina ya mi kanga thigen dila jangju gisim chige tsi jamba da ningje gi thoni simjen de gi dunga daya da dewa thobe gi chedu semba dingni chigore chi yongdu shin drat dila ya rangi shedang lang mares ko simjen dila tanda goe dila jamba da ningje gi thoni konjola ya Migmar gomje ina ya dra dukja chigin dila ko kari china ko la ya nga dawa machi bachi kazi shuk jumbo dawa china sujo le zimba shu na dawa rangshin le yongdu teni dingi gi china teni simjin chil dila ya pengi mares ko zimba shu na zimba song na dawa me silari teni shimba shidal na sakya.
So, but for us beginners, practicing in that way is extremely difficult. No, it may be very easy for us to develop loving compassion for those people who are being abused and killed. Maybe it's not as easy to develop loving compassion for the aggressors, but if at least we can not develop anger towards the aggressors, then this becomes a very authentic practice. If we can avoid growing angry with the perpetrators of these crimes, because if we allow ourselves to grow angry with our enemies, then this is a form of clinging. And if clinging is present, then we don't have the view, as it's said in the Sakya teaching on parting from the four attachments.
Walas, peje tsainzire, tarsunas. Teni ngi tsamshagins, ngowachigins.
Okay, so we'll stop here today and do some dedication.
So namdeye, damje zigbanye, tumne nye beda, nambamjene, kyagana jimbala, tungbaye, sibe tsolen rowan rolwara sho, chanchub simjo rimboche, maji panam, kijurji, keba nyamba mebaya, gone gondu pelwara sho. Tumba jikden kamsu jumbadan, temba nyewi, shindu salwata, tense palop, tarshin gebay, temba yuring nebe drashi.